So I'm going to start with the elevation. And let's go through. I will use the instructions and skip steps that I don't need to. All right, as I go through the instructions, step 1, 2, 3 are all about massing out the windows, and 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Step 7, lightly block out where you want your trees and shrubs to go. All right, so that's an important one. And what I would do is I would do it in pencil, very lightly. And, you know, I like to have you can see that barely, but you can kind of see it. All I'm doing is I like to have a couple trees. I like to introduce a tree on both sides of the building if at all possible. You know, it's going to depend on where you're sited for the plan, but so I just put a bunch of trees in there. All right, next I'm going to double lines to your windows and door openings. All right, well, first we're just going to start putting some of the lines in. And I have a kind of an order that I go in. And you'll see some similarities when I do the plan. Curves are always a nightmare. So I like to do those early on, before I'm tired and I'm inclined to screw up. Now, you could, in theory, use your template for this, but I find doing it freehand with a broken line works a little better. It just does. The problem with the template is if you're a little bit off, it gets a little egg shape or you're not lined up and it's easy to make blobs. So I don't tend to use a circle template when I'm doing my ink curves. Next, so I've done my curves first. Then I'm going to go to my diagonals, because they also have the potential to do just a little harder than doing the straight lines. And here I'm using my, all right, good. I gotta remember where the trees are. And in a minute, I might just break my order. I've got the trees blocked out in pencil, but I should be okay for the diagrams. In a minute, I'm going to go ahead and ink in the trees, at least the edges of them. And I'm going to show you the cheap tree, and I'm going to show you the tree that I'm going to do. First of all, a cheap tree, I was very impressed with the folks that used it. And there are different examples of trees that you can get. Oh, I found another circle. Hooray. Let's do 2 circles wasn't enough for me. I have to do a few more. Now, you probably can't see from back there, but I've blown it on these circles about 5 different times. But by using the dots, they're kind of okay. If you wanted to come up and look at it, you're welcome to. I would suggest it's an N95 mask. Just don't let me breathe on you. What I would do, and see, I already blew it right there. With the trees, I'm going to ink them now. And I'm going to ink out the edges of them. I'm going to adjust this one a little bit. Now, I tend to use I'll go into trees a little bit more. Did I talk about the reverse umbrella stroke? I don't think I did. I showed you how to do it in the video? All right, I'm gonna,
I need a deep dive on tree and shrub edges. Yeah, hook me up, because mine, I hate them.
Did I miss some video you were supposed to watch?
He sent it around,
When?
when we missed class last
yeah, it's,
Oh, I see it now, okay.
yeah, it's last year's class. I think it's last year's class. Where I did this and I had recorded it. And like I said, you might actually, with any luck, you'll get this year's class too. Depending on how well Zoom wants to cooperate with me. And I will show you the reverse. I'll show you both trees in a minute. And this stroke is good for those are all reverse umbrella strokes. When you're like, well, that's awesome. What is a reverse umbrella stroke? And if you got a pen and pencil or pen and paper, just something to scribble on. Let's you might want to try along. All right, so the umbrella stroke is pretty simple in that you kind of draw like a boomerang or an umbrella. So it's like this, okay, and that's an umbrella stroke. And if you notice, it kind of looks like an umbrella. There's a little pointer. And you can make trees just with an umbrella stroke. So you make a big line, you put a couple little ones in it. Little ones. I am so used to doing reverse umbrellas that it's difficult for me to do this, but there's a tree, and that was all done with umbrella strokes. And if I had blocked it out in the beginning, you can kind of, I was told early on, you want to lay it on like scoops of ice cream. So if you think about and that's one way of doing it. Now, I don't really care for that as much as the reverse umbrella stroke. So remember with this one, we've got the umbrella down, but if you turn the umbrella upside down and you go up and make a loosey-goosey stroke, what you can do if I've got a tree, see, I'll just put in a basic shape of the tree. All right, there's a nice blob. And we'll talk about the trunk in a minute. All right, so if I just go around that with this kind of up and down, I go back over it, put a couple blobs in there, and all I'm doing, and every now and then put a couple loose ones out and about. And you can start at one spot, take a little break, go in and fill in another spot. Making it loose is good because that's what you want the tree to do. And all these are small up and down strokes that I put a little bit back on each other. And if it's messy, that's okay. Punch a couple holes in the tree. There's usually a couple holes. Again, throw a couple leaves around there, just hanging off the outside edge. And that's kind of a fun trick. And it's pretty easy to do. And it's just doing, all I'm doing is I'm kind of going up and down and over and up, and over and up, and over, as opposed to going down, down, and over. So a couple little upstrokes and then a big upstroke, and then a couple little strokes, and then maybe a bigger one, and then just jerk it around like that. You'll get it. Keep practicing it. Now, the cheap tree, which is real easy, and a couple of you nailed it. Where I start with the cheap tree is I kind of make a kite or a coffin, depending on what you want. It's a fat coffin, but I start with a shape that kind of looks like, can you see that shape? All right, it's not a rectangle. It's not a rectangle with a point on it. It's kind of a, and that's almost like a truncated, it's almost like a triangle. If we started with the triangle, cut off the top, and then cut off the bottom. All right, so it's, and you can make it narrower, you can make it fatter. Once you have that general shape, and I would do it in pencil. Then what you do is you ink over it and put a couple little breaks in it. And all I'm doing is just putting some woogles in my line, that's all. All right, there's the shape of the tree. Now, I will tend to put a trunk on it. Now, the key with tree trunks and drawings, you don't do them to scale. You make them very narrow. See the size of that trunk in relation to the tree? That's about as big as I want to get. Now, that's very small for a tree trunk. Here. All right. Once I've got that, I can kind of put a line, a jagged line up the middle of my tree. I can kind of put another line up there, and then I'm going to put branches in, but notice the angle of this bottom line. So I'm going to follow that, and I'm going to kind of divvy them up. But and notice the angle of this top line. I want to roll these branches up to where they match the top one. So they start out kind of flat. Put two together on occasion. Try not to have them line right up with each other. And then as they go up the tree, they tend to go from being flat to almost being straight up and down. These are flatter towards the bottom. Oh, I gotta put another one there too. All right, so again, start out flatter at the bottom, and then as I'm going up, I'm coming up here. Couple things, much like when you were doing the lines in your trees and plan. You want to overlap those lines, make them stick out beyond the tree. You want to use hit, go, hit. Maybe throw a couple dots in there. All right. It's Loose is important. A lot of these lines look a lot like what I did my grass with. If you remember the grass that everyone hated in the beginning. It's the same idea. You want them fast and loose and light. And when you're done, that's not a bad tree. It's a little crooked, but if I tilt it, maybe it's better. So that's the cheap tree. Again, I like those. They take color okay. I like these trees better. But you can use either one or a little bit of both. Throw a couple of these in there, throw a couple of those in there. So there's my lecture on trees and cheap trees.
What about shrubbery?
Shrubbery, okay. Well, again, I tend to use that stupid stroke, but a couple shrubs that I find myself using over and over. My pencil keeps hiding. I wind up making a shape something like that. And just putting little U's on it. And then I'll put even smaller U's on the bottom, maybe with a couple breaks. And then I'll put just a couple random just stem lines in there. And that's one that I use a fair amount. You can do the same, I mean, do it any shape. If you watch this shrubbery here on the drawing, I mean, that was kind of a weird, shape something like that. And that one I just did with my reverse umbrella. And the thing is, if you get good with this reverse umbrella, you can just fill up all sorts of stuff with this. And again, the looser you make it, kind of the better it works. Those little leaves on the outside are important. They just let you know. And then what I'll do, depending on where the ground is, let's say that's the ground. I like to keep them closer to the ground than I first did here. But sure, put in a couple stems here and there. Make them loose. And then go ahead and put in a couple more. Excuse me. Leaves on the ground by the stems, which I also tend to do on my trees. And it just kind of breaks that up a little bit. And that's enough. And that's just that's the same thing I did with the trees, only in a different shape. All right, onward with the elevation. Let's start blocking things out. We got our angles in, we got our circles in. One would think we'd be happy, but we have a lot of other lines to do. So I think I just shifted my whole drawing. We'll make it work. All right, I then, once I've done my circles and my diagonal lines, I then do my horizontal lines. Again, make sure they overlap, so shoot them right out beyond the edges. And I'm just tracing now. When I do my windows, on the inside of the window, I tend to put double lines around it. And you'll see what I mean. And what that's doing is kind of hinting at the window frame itself. oops, on the top. These are double hung windows, so they go up and down. They got little grills in them. You'll see a lot of these in New England. You probably have them in your house. And the reason I do these, the reason I have my order of circles, diagonals, horizontals, verticals, is because that's the fastest way. Each step gets progressively faster. I find it easier to do verticals than horizontals. I find it easier to do horizontals than diagonals, and I find it easier to do diagonals than circles. So I try and do my hardest stuff first. And that's as much for just emotional. It's nice if the drawing tends to get faster the more I work on it. I'm just going to put one line here, and I'm going to put a little baseline down, but I'm going to go further out than it shows on the drawings. But we'll get to that more in a minute. I forgot the center line here, which is a double line. All right, it appears that I've gotten all of my horizontals. Now I'm going to go to my verticals. I'm sure I've missed something, and I have. You will find that, I'm sure you guys found this too, that as you do one set of lines, you'll go back and say, oop, I forgot to do those. Now I'm going to go ahead and put in the horizontals. The nice thing about the horizontals is I'm not moving this bar all the time. I'm just sliding this triangle across. And a couple things I try and do, I don't know how well it shows there, but notice I didn't just make a straight line down from the wood to the foundation. I try and put a little tiny jog there. It's not much, but see, I stopped there and then I moved the triangle over just a little bit. Typically, if you look at homes, there is a jog at the foundation. The wood sticks out from the concrete. And if you put a little jog in your drawing, it just gives it a little more kind of a realistic flair to it. It's and it just breaks up all the straight lines. Once again, I forgot the horizontal. So I'll try and catch them when I'm going back and doing it. Trying to be loose with these lines. Remember, I do a double line around the interior of the window. Was it a weekend ago that it was 50 below zero? Yeah. I was hot in my car because I was wearing a coat tonight. I'm gonna do these. You'll find that doing these, like I said, it just goes wicked fast because all I'm doing is sliding that triangle across the bar. For some reason, I just don't like putting a horizontal line on the bottom of these windows. Got a little brick here, and I'm gonna do a little something with that. Two lines there. I'll show you why in a minute. I could be wrong, but I believe that is not a column. You can't see the tree behind it. But if you were to show it as a column and show the tree behind it, it's not like I would get angry. All right, so now I've got almost my first layer of ink work done. I've inked out all the hard edges except for half of the chimney. There, I'll say it a third time and be wrong. Okay, I've inked out all the hard edges. Nope. All right. I'm just not going to say it. I've inked out all the hard edges. All right, and so now we're going to move on to, and remember, see around these windows, I've got a double line in the middle for the two halves that go up and down, but around the whole perimeter, I've got a double line. I don't put them in the circular windows because it's just too hard to do it and make it look good. I just leave that just like it shows. Once we've got that, strengthen your trees. Well, I kind of already did in an earlier step. And the reason I did it in the earlier step is because if I don't, I make mistakes like this where I draw the roof through the tree. And it would be bad if I got all of this in there in front of the tree, like in that one where I cut off, cuts off the window, saves you time later on down the road. Actually, yeah, okay, I'm good. Because you realize what you have to do and there are parts you don't have to do, but if you screw up, it just makes it easier to have a darker line to stop you. Door, window, roof corner trim. I got all the trim in there. Strengthen your trees. Mullions, texture with the materials. Okay, mullions and texture. And then we're going to go to, actually, I'm going to break step a little bit. I'm going to break out my fat Sharpie. And the two things I'm going to do are, and this is again breaking with the sheet, but it's not the end of the world if you want to do it this way. I'm going to go ahead and put my shadows on, and I'm going to put a profile on. Now, the places there are going to be shadows are at the windows, under the eaves, where the bricks stick out a little bit. And those are the main spots. I don't shadow my trees. So let's, using my rule of thumb, that the sun comes up and from the right, up and from the left and shine. The shadows are going to go down and to the right. I'm going to do some of the trim of the building and the brickwork, and I'm going to get to the windows after that. But I want you to watch what happens when I do something as simple as this. And I tend to make it a little fatter on the right, like maybe use a double line there. I have to let that dry because if not, it's going to make a mess. It could make a mess now, but I'm going to try and be careful. And then I'm just going to do a single line over here. Okay, so that's meant to pop out. And you'll notice they already start lifting off the joint. Double line on the left, single line on the right. Okay, now I'll let that dry. I did my diagonals. I want to do my horizontals. Actually, the first thing I want to do is my curves. I would not use my fat Sharpie to do the curves on the windows. What's weird about the windows is, remember, the windows are sticking into the building. So the shadows actually go up and to the left, even though they're being cast down and to the right. So when I do circular windows, I put a very little, I do my, and that's all I'm going to do. Because the more you do with this, the worse it gets. So that's it. I don't put a crazy shadow on the circular windows. Every circle is an opportunity to screw up. So I'm gonna go up here. You see the way this chimney's shaped? I'm gonna do my horizontal lines next. Well, that's gonna cast a shadow. And that's gonna cast a shadow. Now let's come down and see if I've got any more horizontal lines. Well, I do. Where this roof sticks out over the side of the building, there's going to be a shadow, and there'll be a shadow there. Excuse me, at each window, on the top of the window, I'm going to put a nice fat shadow there. Fat shadow there, fat shadow there. And I've got a little bit of brick sticking out here. So I'm gonna put a little shadow under it. And that's pretty good for my horizontal shadows. Now I'm gonna go ahead and do some of the vertical ones, which are simple. With one exception, I'm gonna show you. I'm doing it on the left-hand side of these windows because they recess into the wall. They don't stick out from the wall. All right, so there is another shadow I want to put on here, but I'm going to take it easy with it. And that is this section of building sticks out in front of this section of building. If the sun's coming from over here, it would cast a shadow down here. Now, I could plot out, depending on what time it was, exactly how that shadow would cast. I don't bother. All I'm going to do is put a couple of fat lines there. If my Sharpie doesn't die. Come on, Sharpie, you can get through this. There we go. It was just angry, I guess. And that starts to pop it out. And I would just stop it there. And that's going to make that one come off the page. You can kind of see where it lifted that off the page. My next step would be profile lines. And I'm hoping with this next Sharpie, I want a nice pointy Sharpie for this if I have one. Might work. All right. First thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go around the perimeter of the building. So just the perimeter. I'm going to make sure I overlap. I'll come back to that one. Got my diagonals. Okay, all I've got left is horizontals, so let's put some in. Actually, that's not true. I'm going to put that little jog in here. Notice I didn't do the inside part. I'm just going around the perimeter. Put some dots in there. Get some overlap. Have some fun. Oh, thought I got a nice smear there for you, but I didn't. I don't put profiles through the tree. I didn't do profiles around these interior shapes yet, but I'm going to fix that. So I just went around the outside edge, but again, you can see it start to lift off. For these interior shapes, these shapes and these shapes that stick out in front, but they're not the perimeter, I tend to use a double line with my thin Sharpie. And watch up top and see if that you'll notice the difference. I'm not gonna notice much of a difference if the Sharpie doesn't have any ink in it. Hopefully not doing it. Okay, I'm gonna do the same thing around this part. I'm just gonna go around the outside edge with a double line. Do the same with this one. Yeah, so that's put the edge of that roof. But let's go ahead and all it's doing is it's giving us a third line weight. We've got the fat Sharpie. We've got the two thin Sharpie lines, and then we've got the single Sharpie line. And it just helps punch that out a little bit. We've got some verticals here. And I think that did it. All right, so I profile, you notice that now these stand out a little bit, but not a ton. If I had to put a fat Sharpie line around those, it would just look too heavy. All right, next I'm gonna put in some texture. I've got a little bit of brick down here. I don't know. No, this is clapboard, so I've just got the brick down here. I've got brick here, I've got brick on the chimney. I'm gonna do the clapboard first, and again, all I'm doing, and a lot of you got this, so, you know, it's start in the corners and make it a point to so I put a couple dots in there and just make it go kind of loosey-goosey. Sometimes I'll start from the right, sometimes I'll start from the left. But I just wanna, it's just easier than trying to fill this whole thing with clapboards. I got a corner over here. I mean, I'm kind of eyeballing it as far as how big they are, but just being kind of loose. Sometimes your Sharpie will not put ink when you want it to, and that's actually okay in this scenario. You want it to be very random looking. What I do to know when to stop is I keep looking back at it and saying, okay, where's a big lonely place? That's looking pretty lonely, that's looking pretty lonely, that's looking pretty lonely, and that's looking pretty lonely. So let's just, again, usually corners. Do a few in here just to kind of highlight that tree. Here, I'm gonna start up here and Go to the bottom and throw a few more clapboards in. And a few more down here. Oh, and I probably should have done the other view to do the heartbeat roof, but I've got a little roof here to do it. Again, when to stop, who knows? All right, so I'm good with that for now. For the clapboard, you can kind of get a hint that there's clapboard on the building. For brick, I try and do a couple different things. If possible, put them a little closer together. But the same rules apply. And I'm going to do a little. Just going to do the horizontals for now, but I'm going to come back and rip the tape off my drawing. Excuse me while I fix that. This one will peel off. All right, we got a little bit of brick here. Behind that tree. And some more down here. And I don't mind. Kind of filling that up a little bit more. Now what I'm going to do, in the case of this brick up top here, those are actually called soldiers. They're going up and down. So I'm gonna, and the same thing is going to happen in my chimney. They're fun to draw because you can just do them really quick with your triangle. But you want to be kind of random with them. And I already did those there. Next thing I'm going to do to the brick is I am going to add some horizontal lines. What I'm going to caution you about is, you know, you don't want to get carried away. Ultimately, when you're doing brick or block, it usually looks, when they build it, they alternate courses. And you really don't want to put all these lines in. So what you're trying to do, because it just gets real, if I tried to fill all those little bricks in, it would be pretty heavy. I mean, it would just, but I do like to hint at a few horizontal lines. And I alternate them. But I don't do a whole lot of it. You can kind of see those up there? You probably can't, but once I take my poisonous self away from the drawing, you can come up and look at it and see what I'm talking about a little better. And I will scan this and put it in. All right. Last but not least, the roof. I've only got a small section of roof to show. I might do a big one later on, but let's see. First thing I do, this is the EKG line. So what you're doing is you're doing a straight line with your triangle, with your, I'll use my parallel bar, because all these lines are going to be going horizontal across. All right, you do a straight line, and then you just put a little bump in it. Just like that. Straight line, bump, and try not to line up the bumps. Although that one's pretty close. That's all, and you can practice those. I don't know if that's really, it's kind of a, if I did it to a large scale so you could see it, it would probably look like something like that. Okay, so it's just a bump going up. So when I do this roof, whenever I do my roofs and I want to show them angled, first thing I do is I go halfway on the roof. I put a little dot there, eyeball it, and I put one of my little EKG lines. Then I go halfway down to that. So I divide the half in half. Put some EKG lines. Then I go halfway down to that. And I'm trying not to line up the little bumps. Then I go halfway down on that. That's my first pass. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take those and divide them in half halfway. So rather than go in half all the way across, I'm going to go halfway over just a little, but I'm still doing the half. So I'm dividing those and I leave a little break in the middle. And by the time you get down to the bottom, they start to get pretty heavy. And that's okay. This is a small roof, but you can start to see its slope already. So half, 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 half of the 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 half. And it just sets up nice for a black line. All right, so we've gotten most of this done. So what we have to do now is we have to do a border. I would put some trunks on my trees. And again, my trunks are going to be small. Smaller than you think. Smaller is always better for tree trunks. If you want, you can put some diagonal lines in them to make them look a little more woody. I'll put a couple of just loose ones under here. We'll call that good. Okay, so what I have to do next is I have to put a strong baseline. And I did a baseline down here, but we're going to make it a little stronger. We're going to take a fat Sharpie, and I want you to watch what happens when I do this. I go once, and don't worry about going too far with it to the edges. I go twice. And I just, now notice how that sits right on there. It anchors it to the page. Next, I do, this one's almost as popular as the grass. I draw a wiggly line in pencil. And this, I call my background stripe. Other people call it a picket fence. Much like the grass, students hate it in the beginning, but you'll grow to love it. Don't go all the way to the edge of your stripe. Your background stripe, your background base. Don't go all the way to the end, but all I want you to do is with a Sharpie that can generate a line. Now, again, people never know what this is. They give me a lot of crap and they say, oh, it looks like a picket fence. It doesn't make any sense. Trust me, it anchors your drawing much like the baseline did. It helps the baseline. And it sucks your eye into the drawing. Kind of see that over on that side? It brings you in, which is what we're trying to do. It also tends to wail on the tree trunks, but that's okay. It's a backhanded because I ran out of triangle. Now, there's a good chance I'm going to screw up here. Let's see how well it works out. Ooh, I got lucky. Close enough. All right. So the last thing I'm going to do is I want to put a border around this, and I won't draw a sky. So for the border, again, in the beginning, I wouldn't do what I'm about to do normally, but I've been doing it a while. You might want to grab a pencil, lightly, give yourself a little room at the top. The sides of the border, I want the trees hanging out of it. So make it a point to stick those trees out of your border. Doesn't have to be symmetrical with the building. We do this with a thin Sharpie. We overlap our corners. Go ahead and throw a couple dots in there. And notice how that starts to frame it, but if you look at what I've done, I've set up this pyramid. And that's done except the titles. I'm not going to put a sky in spite of what your instructions say. This is the longest. The baseline is the longest. That shoots up to the background stripe, which goes up to the border. See how that does it? And that just anchors the drawing. And if you remember the ones that you put up on the wall, most of you had your stripe and border coming right kind of together. Hang it out. And it will, like the trees being outside of the frame, it will suck your eyes into the drawing. So in and actually, the last thing I would do is grab my white vinyl eraser. You know what? This wants a clean white piece of paper. I have one. Okay. That looks kind of nice. I would then grab my white vinyl eraser. I'm just going to grab the fat one. I also have a little stick either way. And go ahead and erase lightly the tree lines that I put in there, the border line. It'll come right off. Again, if you did it white enough, you'll pick it right up. A little tip, you can use an erasing brush. They make special drafting erasing brushes. If you try and use your hand, it tends to make a mess. Crumple up a piece of tracing paper. It's a little scrap, and you can use it to sweep off your drawing without smearing a bunch of stuff. If you go crazy with the eraser, you'll pull some of your ink work off. We don't want to do that. We're gonna call that one good, and then we could import it again to put, oh, I forgot to do one thing. Before we import it into GIMP, let's get our scale on it. Now, I'm putting the scale right where I've got it on the drawing. When I get it into GIMP, I might want to move it, but we'll see. I'm going to do the same. Scale that I used before. There is no north arrow on an elevation. If you want, you can label your elevations north, south, east, and west, or front and side. But now I put that little scale on there. And the rest we would take care of again. I'm going to step away from this and turn off the recording.